Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Hello, everyone. Wow, that piano player just won't shut up. Welcome, everybody, to this evening's book launch of Combat Love by Alisyn Camerota. We are so honored here at the Westport Library to be hosting this event, and in her own hometown, and with you, all of our neighbors. So I'm going to keep this super short. As many of you know, Alisyn is a journalist, author, anchor, and correspondent for CNN. She has won 2 Emmy Awards and the Edward R. Murrow Award, and her novel, Amanda Wakes Up, was an NPR selection of Best Books for 2017. Tonight, Alisyn will be sharing her memoir with Gabi Coatsworth and us, who is also an award-winning writer and writing teacher, also from our neighborhood. So, if you could just silence your phones. Combat Love copies will be available for purchase after the event. And without further ado, let's start this book launch.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out on this rainy night.
And hello from me. It's lovely to see so many people here, and I know you're here for Alisyn because you probably feel like you know her since you've had her in your homes, no doubt, many, many times. But I'm thrilled to be here because I got an early look at Combat Love, and I have to admit that I was sort of blown away by the thing, because this suave, elegant person in front of you is not the same person that is in the book. Am I right?
Well,
you ended up suave and lovely.
I mean, I certainly wasn't this put together and this coiffed, and I didn't have this kind of mask of TV makeup, but the seeds were there, I would say.
Yeah, the personality was definitely there. But I started by reading Alisyn's novel, which is called Amanda Wakes Up, that you heard mentioned, the NPR pick. And it's clear that it's based on her life in, well, the press, the media, the whatever you might want to call it. And I just have to ask her this question, so I'm sorry, talk amongst yourselves. So it starts with a reporter taken out of, called up in bed and asked to go to a site to interview people. And she does it, but she can't find her pants because she's been at the beach and all she's got is a bikini and a t-shirt. And I just needed to ask, was that a real thing that happened to you?
Yes. Yes, and in fact, I even talk about that in the intro of Combat Love. I'm not great at the go bag. As a reporter, you're supposed to always have a go bag with all of your clothes and your charger and, food like little snacks and waters. And I'm just horrible at that. And I routinely forget things. And so on that day, I was at the beach. This happened on Cape Cod. I was at the beach. I did only have a bathing suit and a t-shirt because I thought that we were just going to go to the beach. And then John Kennedy Jr.'s plane went down. And that morning, I woke up to my friend who I was visiting saying, John Jr.'s plane is missing. And I said, what is that? John Jr.'s plane is missing? What does that mean? And then I got the call that I had to go to Hyannisport. And I was the first correspondent there on the scene because I had already been on the Cape. But I said to my cameraman, just shoot me from the waist up. And I stayed there for, I think, 9 days. I stayed for 9 days without anything. And I was at that point wearing my producer's wife happened to be a buyer for Chanel. So the first day you see me in a white t-shirt and no pants, but nobody could see that part. And the next day I'm in a Chanel suit, inexplicably. So yeah, that really happened.
That's fascinating. And so to move along from there, when did you know that being in the news or on the news or reporting the news was what you really wanted to do? I'm starting at the end and working backwards, folks.
Well, there is a story. So I was 15 years old, and I had, I liked performing. I did like performing, and I did like public speaking, but I wasn't good at performing. I can't carry a tune. I, took some acting classes when I was little. It didn't really take. I took piano lessons for a long time. I was terrified of piano recitals. And so I didn't really know what I was supposed to do with that performance gene when I had no talent. That seemed like a bad combo, And I was watching one of my favorite shows on TV after school when I was 15, which was the Phil Donahue show, another Westport connection. And it was truly that eureka moment where I said, wait a second, what's that job called? Because he was running around in the studio audience and interviewing the guests, and anybody who loved Phil Donahue like I did will know that he was like, caller, are you there, caller? And it just all felt powerful, and all eyes were on him, and he was like a maestro with the mic. And when I figured out that job was called broadcast journalist, truly from that moment on, I set my sights on that North Star, and I just thought, that's what I want to be.
Okay, you went the long way around, shall we say, based on what I found out in this. But I do have a question about writing the book, first of all, which is, you're a journalist, you're used to trying not to show your emotions, and compartmentalizing, I would guess, your emotions from what's going on in real life. So how did you find the transition from writing journalism to fiction and then memoir?
Well, fiction was a good bridge to kind of ease into this. I did, with Amanda Wakes Up, the veneer of fiction helped me write and gave me a little bit of distance. But I started to feel in the past few years that maybe peeling back the curtain a little would help everyone. I think that even in my day job at CNN, I don't really try to just be stone-faced and stoic anymore. I've sort of learned over the past decade that the viewers are with me. If I'm doing a horribly sad story, and God knows I do a lot of horribly sad stories, if I'm talking to a grieving victim, it's okay if I tear up. I've kind of thrown out that rule that we're just always supposed to be, dispassionate and emotionless. And I think it's okay. I mean, certainly at CNN, I have definitely cried on the air, not sobbed, but I have allowed myself to tear up, and it's been fine. And I'm glad that we're kind of breaking that rule. I'm not alone, obviously, in doing that. And in terms of bearing my soul, as I do in this book, which is very personal and raw, it did take some courage to do that. I mean, I wasn't sold on the fact that I was going to do it. I didn't know if people would want to know behind the makeup facade of their anchor woman. The person that you see every morning on the screen, who you can project whatever you want onto, and who is always, well coiffed with her anchor helmet. I didn't know if people would accept the grittier, more kind of real side. And this is a leap of faith. I mean, I just hope that people will still like me after knowing warts and all.
Yes, understood. So let's get to the book. First of all, for people who might not know, why is it called Combat Love?
It's called Combat Love for a few reasons. So when I was 13, I fell in love with a local punk rock band from Shrewsbury, New Jersey, called Shrapnel. They were basically the older brothers of some of my friends. And they put out a single, their first single, called Combat Love. and I played the hell out of that radio. I just had a turntable in my bedroom, and I played it over and over, and I loved that song so much, and I loved the lead singer's voice, and I loved the energy and the electricity of that song. And then when I saw them that year, so first I heard them and I loved them, and then I went to a concert at my future high school, and I think it's fair to say that like it changed the trajectory of my life, and I was very spellbound by Shrapnel after that. So Combat Love on that level is because it was the single, and they play a role in the book. And then on the other, more meaningful level, Combat is obviously to, hold something at bay. And I really struggled through my teenage years and my 20s with, trying to not be vulnerable, having my guard up. I wanted love, but I was also combating love because it seemed so scary, and it took me a long time and a couple of decades to let my guard down and not have to combat love.
What was it about Shrapnel particularly that attracted you? Was it the music, the lyrics, the guys?
Yes. Yes, I mean, all of it. They were so charismatic, and they were so electric, and the lyrics, they I guess were punk rock. I mean, that's how they were classified, but really all of their songs were about love of some kind or another. And what I loved was that the lead singer, a guy named Dave Windorf, did something that I'd never seen any other lead singer do, but I'd always wanted them to do. He acted out the lyrics. And so when he would say, like, be my baby, he would clutch his heart. And when he would say, like, go to war, he would raise his fist. And I was like, thank you. Somebody, this is before MTV. Somebody's acting out the lyrics. And I just loved them. And it's funny, in putting together the book, I had to revisit Shrapnel, which is not easy to do because they don't really exist on Spotify. It's very hard to find Shrapnel. This was 1981. It was before, all of the online and internet and digital stuff. So I had this never-ending earworm of their songs that I could never satisfy because the songs had vanished. They were just gone. They only existed in my memory. And that was really hard. It took me a long time to kind of be able to put that to rest. And what I ended up doing for the book, I went back, because I'm a journalist, and interviewed every primary person in the book. That's just how I do things. I want to make sure that my story is accurate, that my memory is accurate. And so I called the guys in Shrapnel, and they're bewildered basically by my fascination with Shrapnel, and they have moved on in their lives, but they were really touched, I think, and they were very sweet, and they helped me. I spent a day with them, and they reminded me of the lyrics, and we played some songs, and they have been kind enough to go back into the studio and remix Combat Love for me because my publisher is putting it out with a 45 record. And so they're just, they're just the greatest guy. I was right then at 14, my instincts were right that they were great guys, and they really are still great guys.
I know from reading the book, and this isn't necessarily to give anything away, that you were really devoted to them. And I wondered whether your devotion went as far as dressing like a punk, or piercings, or a mohawk?
Yes, I have a mohawk hidden under here. No, I was never able to pull it off. I admired the kids who were really punk. That they seemed so ballsy, and they had safety pins through their cheeks, and they had mohawks, and I didn't have the attire. I just didn't have the ripped clothes and all of that stuff. So I never could even masquerade as a punk. I basically always looked like this at the punk show. And so I didn't adopt that whole aesthetic.
I'm asking because my daughter is about your age, and she was what I have described in my memoir as a hellion when she was a teenager. And she did actually go and get her hair cut really short, spiked, blonded, and more piercings. I mean, she was walking sort of listing to one side.
She's cooler than I was then.
And yeah, so she's extremely cool now. She's a teacher. But yes, so I was wondering how your mother reacted to your love of this band, and I know she's here this evening.
Yes, she is. My mother supported it. These were our local guys. These were like a local garage band. There was a lot of music growing up in my town in New Jersey. So I'm from Monmouth County, New Jersey, Bruce Springsteen territory, and Bon Jovi. But those are just two. I'm literally only naming two. There were so many bands and so many bands at my high school. So my mom and all the parents knew these guys. They were part of our town. So it wasn't like I was, taking up with the Ramones, though there is a Ramones chapter in there. So they were local heroes, frankly. And again, because I hadn't cut my hair into a mohawk, and I didn't have piercings, I was just, kind of going off to high school every day and harboring, not so secretly, my love of shrapnel. So my mom she knew about it. She was supportive, of course.
Right. And so you said that you went back and contacted them. Were there other people that you contacted or who contacted you once they found out you were writing the book?
I contacted everybody in the book. Everybody. I contacted everybody in the book. And that was, the hardest part of writing a memoir is telling people you're writing a memoir and telling the people in it that you're writing a memoir. And I wasn't asking for their permission, but I was alerting them because I just felt like that was the right thing to do because it is intimate and it is raw, and I just felt like I didn't want anybody to be surprised. And there were some people that I did want their permission. There are some stories in there, as you know, from writing your memoir, as everybody knows, one person's life story isn't only her own. It's everybody in her life. And so I did feel the need to tell my best friends and some ex-boyfriends, well, all the ex-boyfriends in there, that I was writing it. And one of them just sent me back an emoji with the wide eyes. And so everybody had a different reaction, but ultimately when I sent them the pages, everybody was so kind. They were just so kind and supportive.
And nobody said, no, don't publish that?
Well, there were a couple of stories from my teenagehood that people asked me not to include. And so I didn't include those.
Yeah.
And there was one story that was my favorite story. I started with this story. It was like this story of awesome teenage hijinks. It lasted like all night long. My best friend and I went to a party. There was all sorts of crazy stuff that happened and adventures, and it ends with me climbing through her window, at like 6 in the morning, and it was just like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, basically. There was probably like a stolen car in there somewhere. And I wrote it, and I really loved it, and I sent it to her, and she said, yeah, you can't include this. And I said, why not? It's so good. And she goes, it's fine, it just doesn't lead anywhere. And I said, yeah, but it's the quintessential teenage hijinks story. And she said, yeah, it doesn't further the story, so I don't think you need it. And so even that one, she wasn't telling me like no because she was embarrassed. She just was helpful, it's not needed for the story. So there were some things that I treasured that I spiked from it. And of course, the person who had the hardest time with it was my mother. And my mother is the person who said repeatedly while I was writing this, can't you wait until I'm dead? And here she is in the front row, and I'm so glad that I did not honor her request. I am so glad I did not honor her request because she ended up helping me. She's our family historian. She knows all of my history. And she knows the stuff from before I was born that has affected my life. And I needed her help with this. And so by going back and being able to interview her, I was able to put the pieces together, which was a real gift for me. And I also, in some of the parts where she and I are having tension and become not estranged, but we do separate when I'm 16, I got to hear why. I got to hear what was going on in her life and what her thought process was, and the pain that she was sort of keeping secret, and the pain that I was keeping secret, I got to share with her. So it was actually a really healing exercise, being able to go back and do all of that.
Did you ever figure out where the two of you got your stiff upper lip from? Because it's interesting that although your name is Camerota, you do not come across as a volatile kind of Italian type stereotype.
Well, ask my husband, who's also in the audience, what he thinks about my emotional control. I do not have a stiff upper lip. I certainly didn't, as you'll see in the book. I was a very emotional kid and a very emotional teenager. I would often burst into tears all the time. I would sometimes burst into tears at a party because I was so happy at the party, like just crying. So I often cried because I was sad or in despair. So my mother has a stiff upper lip, much more so than I do. And I found out in researching this book, she's from what's called the silent generation. So born in the 1940s, there was a silent generation that didn't share their pain and their secrets. And so ergo, this is particularly hard for her, but also she just was quiet about that. And you know, I don't know if on balance that was the right thing for that generation. I don't know that served them that well.
Yeah, speaking from my history, because I'm probably close to your mother's age, coming from the generation that had been to war, everybody developed a stiff upper lip because it was too painful to keep reacting to what was going on, you know. And I think that did make it harder for us, the children of that generation, because we didn't want to make our moms cry or anything, right? So, okay. What do you think you learned from the life you lived as a teenager, which was unconventional? And I don't want to give too much of it away, but it was unconventional. It does not sound like a typical suburban Jersey childhood.
No, I had an unconventional life even before I left home at 16. For sure. I was an only child. That was unusual. My parents were intellectuals and also progressive in that they really believed that I should have independence. They gave me a lot of independence. I went to a very progressive school that believed in, you know, kids kind of dictating their own course of study. So I was already a free thinker and an independent kid, and then I only got more so. And so I think that all of that fending for myself as a teenager and independence did pave the path for me to become a journalist. I hearken back to those years a lot in my daily journalism job. You know, anytime I need an injection of grit or, you know, something to make me battle ready in an interview that I'm doing with a reluctant politician or, you know, whomever, I do call upon the Shrapnel days in my head a lot because those were an injection of grit and of, you know, I mean, the whole punk rock movement was kind of anti-establishment, obviously. It was questioning authority. And that's what journalism is too. You know, we hold powerful people's feet to the fire. So there is, in that way, a connection. And I do think that the roots of it were planted during my teenage years. And then just having to be so self-sufficient, it made me stronger. I wasn't a particularly tough kid. I was a soft kid. I wasn't an athlete. I never played any sports. I wasn't on any team. I was happy to sit cross-legged in my backyard looking at the dandelions. And then things got tougher and harder, and I'm grateful for that because I do think it equipped me well for this career.
Do you think that time of your life was where you learned empathy?
No, I don't, because I think that what I learned in writing this book is that I was in such survival mode for so long that I wasn't really able to be that empathetic towards other people. I was always nice to people, and I was a good friend. I was a loyal friend, but I didn't have that much compassion or empathy because what I've learned is that when you're in survival mode, I mean, I was broke a lot of the time. I often was wrestling with, not often, but I did have a couple of bouts of deep depression. I was, you know, hungry, figuratively and literally. And that just didn't allow me to have that much compassion. Now, once I had a stable home and had my own children and had enough money and knew where my next meal was coming from, I have been able to have a lot more compassion. And I do have a lot more compassion for people in hard circumstances because of my memory.
And it seems that you finally learned to have some compassion for yourself, because you were very hard on yourself when you were younger, it seems to me. And moving across the country, for example, was something that seemed to have thrown you off completely, because you were at that sort of vulnerable age when you don't want to leave your friends and your life behind.
For sure. No, for sure. That was very disorienting for me and very sad for me. And I felt such a sense of belonging in my hometown of Shrewsbury, New Jersey. And I knew the people there, and I had friends, and we shared each other's stories, and I knew the accents, and I knew, the Jersey accents that I had as well. And I knew how people dressed, and I knew the music, and I knew Shrapnel. And then I moved to this foreign land called Bellingham, Washington, where the accents were totally different, and they dressed different, and they put pineapple on their pizza. And it was so baffling to me. And I was such a fish out of water. People literally came, not from miles around, but strangers in high school did come up and say, we hear you talk weird. Can you talk for us?
Oh.
And I'd say, what do you mean, hot dog? That was one of their favorite words for me to say. But anyway, I don't think I was particularly hard on myself. I mean, I just think I was trying to survive. Like, I think that I was just, I hope that people, when they read it, are just rooting for this teenager who is trying to find her way.
Oh, absolutely. I can vouch for that. And in particular, you get to the part where you do hit rock bottom. And I want to mention this because I think it's an extremely important topic, and that is that you came to the point where you wanted or needed to call a suicide hotline. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to include that in the book, and whether you have any suggestions for teenagers who get themselves to that position?
Yeah, I thought it was important to include it because suicide rates are going up. I think that certainly with teenagers they are. And I just wanted to show everyone that, when you are feeling that depth of despair or suicide, you think it will never change. That's, the thinking of suicide puts you into this warped mind space where you think it will always be like this and the pain will always be that intense. And it's just not true, as we all know, once you come out the other side of it. And it is possible to come out the other side of it. But it was hard, and ultimately, I only did so with the help of therapy and the help, at that time, of an antidepressant. And so I just wanted to peel back the curtain on that, because I hope that will be inspirational to people that it can change, even though you don't believe that it will change. And I don't think that having a stigma about suicide and suicidal ideation has helped. I mean, suicide rates are spiking. So I think that we need to take away the stigma and talk about it more, because obviously keeping it to ourselves isn't working.
Yeah, but that's particularly true of young people. If you were to look back at your younger self, your 13 to 15, 16-year-old self, what would you want that teenager in some ways, teenager to know that you didn't know then?
Well, I mean, of course I'd want her to know that it's all going to work out, but that's silly because you have to go through it all to get to the point where it's going to work out. You can't just tell. I mean, I'm sure that my mother told me at that time it's all going to work out, but I dismissed that. In fact, she did tell me that. She was like, you're going to have this new adventure. You're going to move across the country. You're going to meet all sorts of new friends. And I was like, I don't want any new friends. And then I did meet new friends. And they are some of my best friends in my life right now. So that's all true, but you can't tell that to a teenager because you just have to live through the pain, and live through the loss. So I just would have dismissed any advice from myself.
Which brings me to today's teenagers have social media and they have technology. How would your life have been different do you think, you talk about the fact that you had vinyl, you know, no digital media, no phones, any, which can feel quite isolating to a person these days. So do you think that you had a better teenagehood without it than a teenager today who has all those? Yes?
Yes. I mean, now, you know, it all seems so quaint. I mean, even, you know, punk rock in the 80s and going to CBGB somehow has like a charming glow around it now because we were just all in it together, and you had to call somebody on a landline and have them come pick you up, and you had to make plans and, you know, all of that stuff, and we were off the grid. Our parents didn't know where we were. They couldn't find us. We weren't on, you know, being tracked on Life 360 at all times. And so that just seems, I don't know, I long for some of that freedom for my teenagers. I long for that. Not the dangerous part. I mean, I definitely was in dangerous situations that I shouldn't have been in, as you guys will all read, but I do wish that they had a little taste of that freedom. Some nights of having to fend for themselves and figure it out without us tracking them. Like, you know, now we can see them. Hey, are you lost? You know, we can call them before they call us. And I don't really know if that's doing them any favors.
Well, it's very clear that you developed street smarts from your life as a teenager, and I did the same in London because you had to. There weren't any alternatives. And which was the stickiest situation that you got into that you...
Yeah, well, one night I was going to see Shrapnel, and I went with the two scariest, hard drug doing, leather jacket wearing music guys in our town. And I hitched a ride with them because I wanted to see Shrapnel, but I didn't feel comfortable with them, and I didn't know that the driver, a guy I call Cuts in the book, was a horrible, horrible driver, and that he had a Dodge Dart, a dented Dodge Dart, and we were gonna be like speeding up the Garden State Parkway to New York in his dented Dodge Dart while he was drinking beer after beer after beer. And it was terrifying getting there. Just the ride there was getting there. And I remember praying in the car, please God, don't let me have to ride home with Cuts. Please God, don't let me have to ride home with Cuts. Please God, I had this mantra going in my head. And God delivered. The minute that we got there, he passed out. On the stage, like on the side of the stage, he passed out. And I was relieved, very relieved, that he had passed out. And at the end of the show, he slept through the show. At the end of the show, I couldn't rouse him. I poked him and couldn't rouse him. Like, he might have been dead, and I was relieved. And so I thought I got lucky, except that then I couldn't find the other guy, who I call Bert in here. I couldn't find him either. And so then I had dragged a poor unsuspecting friend along with me, and we were standing on a street corner in Queens. I had never even been to Queens. I didn't even know that we weren't in Manhattan. I thought we were in Manhattan, but we were in Queens at a club called Zappa's. And we were standing there. I didn't have any money. I never had any money. So I was standing on the street corner. It was 1 a.m. I was in Queens, couldn't find Bert. Cuts had passed out. And I was trying to piece together how I was going to get home from there. She was freaking out, the girl that I brought, because she did not expect any of this. And I didn't have a plan. I was trying to concoct a plan in my head, and I'll let everybody read the book to see what happens next. But in having to go back and piece this together, I was thinking to myself, okay, was this as dramatic as I thought? And just, this was in Queens, right? It was a club called Zappa. Where was that? And so I called Bert, the guy who abandoned me that night, you know, who left or who vanished or whatever, and we met for lunch. And of course, he's a grown-up now, and he's an awesome, you know, he was an awesome guy, and I really, really fond of him. And I said, do you remember some night at a club called Zappa's? And he goes, oh, something really messed up happened that night. I said, yes, it did. And so I got his memory of that. And again, I mean, that's just, you know, it's a real gift. It was just a real gift to be able to go back and reconnect with everybody as adults and remember how we dodged death in the Dodge Dart.
Yeah. Yeah, that's lovely. Did you find that people... No, I was not being ironic.
I know.
No, well, because the thing is, what struck me about what you just said was that it seems that you mostly survived unscathed, not just you, but your friends and your...
Well, not so fast. Not so fast. I definitely carried some battle wounds emotionally.
Yes.
For sure. And my friends had it worse than I did. Many of my friends struggled with drug addiction. They ended up with very serious drug addiction and alcoholism that they didn't pull themselves out of for many years. And the friends that I have now did pull themselves out admirably. And they still go to meetings and they work the program. And they're wonderful. They're wonderful. I mean, they were wonderful when I was a teenager. They're more wonderful, clean and sober. But it wasn't an easy road for any of them.
When did you decide that you'd had enough of being a sort of damaged person and needed to figure out your own life to make it better?
When I was 31. I was 31. I mean, there's a scene in the book where I've lost a job that I loved, a show has ended, a relationship has ended, that I didn't think was important to me until it ended. People were moving on with their lives. I couldn't. I was incapable of sustaining a long-term relationship, and I just knew it was time to get to the bottom of it. And I was able to, I mean, thank God, I'm very grateful, both my parents lived long enough that I could get closure from both of them. I made these pilgrimages to see my mother. She happened to be living in South Korea at the time. You'll see why in the book. She was living in South Korea. I made a pilgrimage there to talk to her. It gave me tremendous closure. Her response to my questions and my pain gave me tremendous closure. I then made a pilgrimage to South Jersey to see my dad. He gave me closure, and in an entirely different way. My mother's was a 12-hour, intense come-to-Jesus conversation. My father's was a 20-second, conversation driving to the restaurant in the car, but honestly, also very effective. And that's when I just realized, oh, actually, it's all up to me. Like to what you were saying, there's no blaming people anymore. It's up to me now about how I'm going to put the rest of my life together.
Okay, so this is good. I was very happy. Some people would end a memoir at the point where they stopped being a teenager or something. But I loved the fact that you actually went on to talk about how you came to be the person that you are today, the way you decided to go to college and learn to be a journalist, and your early experience of working as a journalist, which I think is quite fascinating. Can you just give the audience a little taste of what your early journalism career was like?
Sure. My first job ever was for Ted Koppel. I was the lowly desk assistant. That's the lowest on the totem pole that you can be. And this was back in the 80s. I mean, Ted Koppel was, just one of the most legendary newsmen and interviewers of our time, award-winning. And, this was in the days of broadcast journalism when powerful people could do whatever they wanted, really. And that, I would say that era lasted until about 2017. And so, we were at the whim of the Peter Jennings and Sam Donaldsons and, Charlie Rose and Ted, but I don't mean to suggest that Ted's in the Charlie Rose category. I just mean these were very, very highly paid, very powerful, very serious men. And I was, just trying to do my best, and as you'll read, I fell short often, and it was hard, and it was embarrassing, but it, built character. And I really wanted to be a reporter on camera, so I stayed there working behind the scenes for 2.5 years, and then I got what I considered to be my big break, which was becoming a crime reporter at the show America's Most Wanted. And I loved that job. My job was, after somebody was captured, after one of the fugitives was captured, to go into the jail cell of the murderer or the rapist and ask them, like, why'd you do it? What do you have to say to the victims? And again, after you've survived being in the Bowery, at CBGB's, and, surrounded by punk skinheads with baseball bats, going into a prison, I was like, those guys are behind bars, right? I'm not scared of people behind bars. And so I do think it gave me some of the grit and courage that I later employed in my career.
Did you find yourself having any sympathy for any of them?
Oh, yeah, I did. I do feel that, I think that one of the big gifts of my life and of my youth is I don't put people in boxes. I don't think because you've done something bad, you're a bad person, or just because you do good things, that means that you're angelic. I just don't think you can categorize people that way. I have a lot of close friends who have done bad things. I met at America's Most Wanted bad guys who ended up doing courageous things. I think that people are more complicated than that. And I did feel for them because they had, generally what I found was that these criminals were guys with no coping skills, a hair trigger temper, and in one night they made a horrible decision and ruined their life and everybody around them. And that just seems tragic.
Well, I will say that as complicated people go, I'm sitting next to one, but I'm wondering whether anybody, in a good way, I'm wondering whether anybody in the audience has a question that they would like to ask. And if you would, please go over there and use the microphone to find out things that I haven't talked about.
Don't be shy.
Yep, don't be shy. We can talk about the news. We can talk about your favorite band, your first concert, anything.
The Beatles.
You guys would like to talk about.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Sorry, I'm so loud. I am curious if you ever played an instrument or joined a band.
It was the lack of talent that stopped me. I played piano. I took piano lessons for, 5 years. Oh, right. My mom just reminded me I also took cello. Which is not great in a punk rock band.
They didn't need a piano in Shrapnel?
No, they did not have a piano or a keyboard in Shrapnel, and a cello is not in a lot of punk rock bands. So I just wasn't setting myself up well, I feel, to be in a band, and I can't carry a tune. So that only those things, lack of musical talent and not being able to sing, is what stopped me. Only that.
So music, let me just throw one in here, because music has obviously been a backdrop to your entire life. So have you got a playlist that goes with the book?
I do. I do have a playlist, so you can find it on Spotify. So it's the soundtrack to the book and the soundtrack to my life, because music is so powerful. I mean, I'm sure that so many of you feel that way. Music is, magic. It's magical. And I've used it as medicine, when I've been feeling down or depressed. Music can change that. And I've used it to transport me. I use it as a time machine all the time, because I can instantly go back to the 80s and back to whatever party I was at when I hear a particular song. I know the lyrics to every song. So music is, in my teenage years, I used it as kind of a roadmap for life. I would just listen to the lyrics and try to follow them. Those were some of my guidance. So yeah, music is really important, and I felt that it had to come with a playlist. Yes, you, the lovely lady in the beautiful shirt, yes.
Hello, Alisyn.
Hello, Stephanie.
I love your memoir, and I think your memory is extraordinary, and from really early on, 5 years old, and I'm wondering, what do you attribute that wonderful memory to?
Thank you. I do have a really good memory. I have a really good memory for words. I don't have a great memory for faces, so forgive me if we're best friends and you come up to me tonight and I don't know who you are. I remember I remember the lyrics to every song, as I said. I remember some conversations verbatim. I can remember exactly a line that someone said from decades ago. I am also somebody, unusually, who has a pre-verbal memory. Most people don't have memories from their childhood until after they could speak, because somehow, like, speaking cements the memory. I have a memory of being in a baby seat, like a car seat, before I could speak. A vivid memory. I've had it my whole life. And so I just have that, I don't know, there's something in my brain, which whatever the long-term memory bank of the brain, the hippocampus or whatever, is more pronounced, I think, than other people. And in some ways, it's wonderful, but in some ways it's a curse, because those old memories are very present for me. I'm very nostalgic, and those memories are very present for me. And so writing this book helped put some of those away, because they were really like floating around in my brain a lot.
Yeah, I think that's the advantage of writing a memoir, is that you can come to certain sort of peace with your own story and not have it going around and around because it's now on the page.
For sure.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read your memoir. I too love Phil Donahue and actually worked on his show in 1987.
You did? That's so cool.
One year he was here at CBTV when NBC was on strike and he didn't want to cross the picket line, so he was here when he was living in Westport too. Anyway, my question is, did you ever think about doing a daytime talk show, or I think it would be great as a nighttime talk show host?
Thank you very much for saying that. I do think that would be really fun. You know, it's hard. I mean, those things don't just come around all the time. So what I did instead was morning news shows. And I tried on my morning news shows that I've done, both at Fox and at CNN, to do that, to sort of have different perspectives, to have the viewers be able to meet people that they wouldn't have met in their regular life. I tried to inject some levity. I see my former co-host from one of my morning shows here in the audience, Dave Briggs. And Dave and I have such a connection and such fondness for that time together, because we did a killer morning show together. It was called Fox and Friends Weekend, and we tried to inject humanity and some levity for people on the weekends, even if the news cycle was brutal. So I value talk shows. I know the power of them from both sides, from watching it as a kid and watching Phil Donahue and the power of that show, and then being lucky enough to be the host of a morning show, and I saw how important that was to the viewers and how much people responded.
Well, without any other audience questions, I want to thank you, Alisyn, for bringing your story here to us, and I'm looking forward to reading this, as I'm hoping everybody else in the audience is too. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Westport. Thank you for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. And Gabi, thanks for the great questions.
My pleasure.
Such a delight to talk to you.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for coming, and for anyone who would like to purchase a copy of Combat Love, we have them right over here. Alisyn will be signing them. Please form an orderly line or queue right here in front of us, and we'll get to everybody. Thank you so much.